An organization's financial position really defines what its capabilities are. If that organization has a lot of money in the bank, then it will tell you something about that organization. If they're desperately in debt, it will tell you something about that organization. The financial position of an organization ultimately tells you what its capabilities are. It can say all the words it likes, but if it doesn't have any money, it can't do any of the things it talks about. So let's use that as an example. A lot of organizations will invest in what already works. We'll talk about organizational program later, but let's look at it financially. So I'll go back 30 years to a company that no longer exists called Pitchertel. Now, 30 years ago, Pitchertel was a major player, about 65% of the video conferencing market. And they had three major divisions. They had the division that made the Concords, which were their very high-end Unix-based systems. The mid-range systems, which were PC-based, called the Venues. And then they had the Swift Site solutions, which were their entry-level, only about $10,000, $12,000 set-top box devices. Each division got to keep the profit they made to reinvest into the future. So the Concord division, making $100,000 codecs, got to spend a ton of money developing it. And the Swift Site department didn't get really any money because they didn't sell very many, because it wasn't a very good product and they didn't have the money to reinvest. So what happened? Polycom came along, reinvented the market with the View Station, which was very similar to a Swift Site, but actually had some investment money, and they crushed Pitchertel. In fact, in the end, they ended up buying Pitchertel. So knowing where an organization spends its money can really help you understand where they're going in the future. Another example, if an organization's sitting on a ton of money, then what are they doing with it? If they've got a few $1 billion in the bank, it's probably likely that they run out of ideas. After all, if you've got lots of good ideas as to where you want to go as a business, maybe you'll be investing that money into a new company, for example, a bit of M&A, or reinvesting it in the organization as it is. Most organizations that have run out of things to do, just simply run out of imagination, probably end up buying their own shares back. Now, that's not necessarily bad for the shareholders, but it could certainly give you as a competitor an understanding as to how much innovation are they actually interested in or even capable of. Another example, we have to hit this one head on. If you're owned by private equity, then it's a pretty good chance that you're not going to get to spend any money, because private equity don't like spending money. They like making the company look as good as possible over a shorter period as possible, and then quite likely selling it off to someone else or loading it up with debt. Now, I'm not going to get into the relative merits as to whether private equity makes sense or whether it's a decent business model, but certainly if you or your competitors have private equity ownership, they're very unlikely to be reinvesting in their business. They're probably turning that business into a cash cow. It's a pretty useful thing to know.